Hi everybody, John here again. Um, in this video I thought it would be interesting to make a sort of a spotlight video on one of my favourite bands. It's not a band that I spend an awful lot of time speaking about in the vinyl community because the majority of their albums have been released on CD. They've just released a new album this year after a 17-year break. And it's really good. And I thought people really should know about this band, so I'm going to spend a bit of time telling you a bit about them, my experience of them, and describe a little bit of the music. And as you know, I like to include needle drops and sound snippets, so look out for those as we go along. So the band I'm going to talk about now is Ritual. I don't know about you, but I'm always a little bit suspicious of bands that disappear and then reappear with a new album on the horizon and a big tour and that sort of thing. You can see that in Oasis these days, can't you? And I'm sure there are other bands out there that do it too. But this isn't so with Ritual. So their last album that they made before the one they've just released this year was in 2008. And since then, they've been sort of having this steady progress of making this record. I don't know this as a fact. I'm just speculating, and I guess it's because there's such a long time between when they last made a record and now. Is I suspect that these musicians in this band probably have day jobs. I could be wrong, but I suspect that's really what it comes down to, and I suspect that they don't have the luxury of disappearing into a country cottage somewhere in the country to record an album luxuriously like that. They have to kind of grab the time as and when it comes along, and so I think that's really what's happened. Anyway, so what's quite special about them is that they draw a lot of inspiration from the Finnish children's book writer called Tove Jansson. She's sort of like a world-class author. She's dead now, obviously, but she's a big, huge folk name in Finland and also in Sweden. There's a kind of a marriage between Finland and Sweden, and she I think people would say that she was Finnish-Swedish, Finlandssvensk. Anyway, so Tove Jansson wrote books primarily about little trolls called Moomin trolls, and they had adventures. Now you could be forgiven for thinking that it's like Tweed because it's based on children's books and it's going to be all sort of soppy and furry kittens everywhere and things like that. Absolutely not. If Tove Jansson, I believe, and this is just me saying this, Tove Jansson, if you wanted to compare the type of stories that she wrote and the books and the themes and the atmosphere that she evoked in her writing, it's a bit like Scandi noir for children, if you like. It's not it's not this sort of soft fairy kitten type stuff. It's often quite dark and there's a lot of texture to her themes, and Ritual seize upon that, and they base a lot of their music on her art and on her stories and on her characters and things like that. Not every song that they make is based on that, but many of them are, and it's always a recurring theme in Ritual's music, and I think it really makes them quite special. Another thing I was going to say about them is that to gain that kind of floral sort of Nordic summery feel, or sort of rural feel, I suppose you might say, they use quite a lot of folk instruments in their music, and to amazing effects. It's not all their songs aren't sort of folk, and I wouldn't say that their style is folky or anything like that, but they do incorporate a lot of folk instruments into their music to really kind of build this gorgeous sounding texture that leads their songs. I think you've got to hear it to really sort of understand it, I think, because I'm not doing a very good job of explaining that, but it's what they do. These are some of the instruments that they use. So I would say that Ritual draw influence from a variety of different bands. One I think you can hear quite clearly is Gentle Giant, and I think they also have a kind of affinity with some of the more pastoral style progressive rock that's happened in the past, Genesis, probably a bit of Jethro Tull in there too. But there's also small little notes, little elements of Led Zeppelin. Now I say that cautiously because, there are a lot of bands out there, aren't there, that basically rip Led Zeppelin off and they sound very close to Led Zeppelin and things. I wouldn't say that Ritual do that, but because they're using folk instruments, and because they're sort of having like a narrative driven songs often and all that they're employing these instruments for, it can generate that slight sort of sense of Led Zeppelin sometimes, some of the folkier moments in Led Zeppelin. But I don't think they do it to sound like Zeppelin. They do it the way they're doing it, and it just works out. They sound a bit like that in places. So I'll talk a little bit about their albums that released. So I think they formed in Sweden in 1993, which also happened to be the year that I moved to Sweden. I didn't hear about them then. They were probably quite an underground band at the time. I learnt about them in 2008 when my first son was born, and the importance of that date is that was when I stopped listening to hard rock and heavy metal. It was my kind of go-to music for a long time, for many years. But with a baby in the house, I just felt it didn't seem quite appropriate to be listening to, Motorhead, Maiden, Slayer. It just seemed wrong. And so I stopped listening to metal quite abruptly, and I went on a pilgrimage listening to the Beatles, getting to know their albums. And before long, I sort of discovered, just through sort of searching, that there was quite a healthy progressive rock scene happening in Sweden that had been going on for a while, and Ritual seemed to be part of that. This is the first album that we released. It's simply called Ritual, and it kind of makes the template of who the band is and what they were going to do. This came out in '96. It wowed quite a lot of people, and I think a lot of people, come to a lot of people's attention because of that album. They just can't hear me. I wish I was far away. This is the second album. It's called Superb Birth. This one didn't go down quite so well with critics and fans. I think because it took a little sidestep. The songs are still really strong, really great, and they still do incorporate quite a lot of the folk in the music, but perhaps a little bit less, and I don't know why that should be. I think in retrospect it sounds really good and it's a really good album. It's just because it's strayed a little bit from what the first album did, that people maybe sort of felt a little bit uncertain about it. But it's a really good, really, really good album. So that brings me to the third album they released. It's called Think Like a Mountain. And this came out in 2003. It's a very, very strong album. Probably their strongest to this point. And yeah, I always remember getting this. I got it, and I was in a kind of point of crisis in my life at the time. I won't go into that. It's just that I was in a really sort of bad place, and something quite sort of serious had happened. And this one arrived in the post, and I kind of put off listening to it because I don't know about you, but I have a sort of muscle memory with music, and when I get into a particular album or particular songs, that music forever then, reminds me of that time when I get into it, And I didn't want this to be the album that took me back, whenever I heard it, back to that time of crisis that I was in. So I left it for a while, but eventually I did pick it up. And I'm really glad that I did pick it up when I did, because it turned out to be a turning point, The music really did lift my mood, and it really did carry me through that particular crisis at the time. And whenever I hear it now, it does take me back to that time, but it takes me back to the upward motion, where I was coming out of that sort of deep pit that I was in, and it kind of brings a little sort of feeling of optimism with it, and that was what it gave me at the time, and that's still what it gives me now. Really, fantastic CD this is. And again, I mean, there's songs on here that are, they are sort of inspired by the Moomin Troll sagas by Tove Jansson. And there's even a track on here called Moomin Took My Head. Beautiful, really good album. Now that brings me right up to this album. I have struggled to say this one, the Hemulic Voluntary Band. This is the first album of theirs that I heard. So it's their fourth album, released in 2008, that year when I stopped listening to metal and hard rock, and spent time listening to the Beatles, but also eventually discovering some of the local music that was being made in Sweden. And this completely swept me away. There is music on here that is absolutely incredible. And I would happily say that this is easily one of my favourite progressive rock albums of all time. You've got to hear it to believe it. I do a dreadful job of explaining how these things sound. But Ritual really kind of gathered speed on here in terms of embracing the folk music traditions that they'd kind of always kept a hand in. And the first track is I'd say it's sort of semi-acoustic, like a semi-acoustic progressive rock blast. You've really got to hear it. It's incredible. I love that piece of music. In fact, I like the whole album, but that first really does sweep you off your feet. And then the last track on here is a track called A Dangerous Journey. It's a over 26 minute epic based on the Tove Jansson children's book called A Dangerous Journey. And that is absolutely incredible. When I listened to this, I had a dog, a Cocker Spaniel called Winnie. She was our sort of first child in many ways. My wife and I got the dog before we had any children, and I had this wonderful job at the time where I worked from home, and I used to take a lunch break every day, and the lunch break would be grabbing a sandwich, going out my front door, and we lived in glorious rural Sweden, in Katrineholm, and I used to walk through the farmland with my dog, playing fetch, maybe walk a mile or two around a big loop, and on my headphones I'd be listening to this, and when I listen to this now, it takes me back to that experience of walking through this glorious Swedish countryside. In the winter time it was snow and ice. In the spring the land was kind of scrubbed through the harsh winter it had, but it was sort of prepared, ready for the spring and the summer to explode. And listen to this, it takes me right back. Brilliant album. So this was, like I said, the first album of theirs that I listened to. So all the other ones that I've been shown, I listened to that retrospectively. So in 2020, this was released. I heard about it just last year, and I was really amazed when I heard about it, and I sought out a copy for myself and bought it immediately. And it's an EP. It's got 4 tracks on it. It's based on the album that they've only just released now. And that was a really lovely thing. When I got it, it didn't sound as brilliant to me as what I'd hoped it was going to do. I knew it was material that they'd been making since 2008, and I've been listening to it in the hope that it's going to grow on me and that, and it never really did. However, just a couple of weeks ago, I got a copy of their new album, The Story of Mr. Bogged, and listening to those tracks that are on the EP in context really brings them to life. And now those tracks that I was struggling to kind of find an appreciation for, they make sense because this is a concept album, and it's part 1 of a concept album. So part 1, they've yet to release part 2. I just hope it's not going to take another 17 years between this and part 2. Hopefully it will come out sometime soon. But this is fantastic, really good record. I recommend anyone that likes high quality progressive rock, narrative driven songs, fantastic musicianship. I recommend this. Yeah, you won't be disappointed. It's a really good album. And yeah, so that sort of brings me full circle, really. I just wanted to talk about this and say how much I enjoy it, and I recommend it to anybody that likes this type of Swedish progressive rock music. Okay, everybody. Sorry for rambling, but well, I enjoyed this. Enjoy the music that I include in this. I hope you find it inspiring. Thanks very much. Check out my next video. Bye.
Imagine, if you will, a teeming town with all its streets and facilities. Then imagine, if you can, the old town square with all its amenities. But it's late in the night, and there's no one inside. There we see the town hall and the church and all the striking authorities. A certain building catch our eyes, its palace like, oh my, it's a sight to see. And in front of its gates, there's one carriage Suddenly the doors fling up.